It's meme time, it's meme time. Gather all your friends, it's meme time. It's meme time, it's meme time. The only cure for sadness.
Alabasta Saga, Reverse Mountain. Nami navigated the Straw Hats up the reverse mountain where the four ocean currents converge, creating an upward draft. They came to an unexpected surprise, which was a gigantic whale in their way. Fortunately, Luffy was able to slow down the Going Merry before it could hit the whale by firing a cannon. However, in the process, Luffy's favorite seat, the Going Merry's figurehead, was broken. Angered by this, Luffy punched the whale's eye to the shock of the rest of Luffy's crew. In response to Luffy's attack, the whale swallowed the Going Merry. While inside the whale, Luffy accidentally bumped into two strangely dressed people, and into the whale's stomach as the whale began thrashing at the red line. Within the whale's stomach, Luffy was reunited with his crew and witnessed the scene between the two people he bumped into earlier and an old man living in the whale. From the scene, Luffy learned that the duo, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine, were planning to kill the whale for food and not even allow the old man, Crocus, to stand in their way. Seeing this and Crocus's attempt to save the whale, Luffy took out the two troublemakers. For doing this, Luffy and his crew were led out of the whale by Crocus. As Luffy's crew and ship were led out through a canal in the whale and outside to a nearby cape, Luffy and his crew were told about Laboon's tale. From it, Luffy learned that Laboon had been waiting for over 50 years for some pirate friends of his who left him behind in the Cape to journey the Grand Line. Luffy also learned that after Laboon heard in disbelief that the pirates might have abandoned him, the whale was ramming the mountain itself in a futile attempt to reunite with them. Seeing Laboon's loyalty, Luffy decided to ease the lonely whale's pain by ramming the Going Merry's mast into an open wound. Having caught the whale's attention, Luffy and the whale began to battle. However, in the middle of it, Luffy told Laboon that they would have to put the fight on hold since he was planning to travel the Grand Line. With this statement, Luffy touched Laboon's feelings and the whale agreed. Having given hope once again to Laboon, Luffy painted a crudely drawn painting of his Jolly Roger on Laboon's scars as a symbol of their pact to meet once again. After rekindling Laboon's hopes once again, Luffy and the rest of his crew suddenly realized that their compass wasn't working. With that matter at hand, Luffy and the rest were then taught by Crocus about how the Grand Line works and how they needed a special compass called a log pose. Fortunately, Crocus had an extra one for Luffy and his crew to use. In the midst of what was happening, Luffy and his crew also encountered again the two people who tried to kill Laboon. Learning that these two needed to report back to the company they were working for, Luffy and the rest were requested by them to give them a ride back to their island of Whiskey Peak. Though a bit suspicious, they learned that Whiskey Peak is on one of the paths that the Straw Hats needed to follow to travel the Grand Line anyway. Thus, Luffy and his crew took the two aboard and sailed towards Whiskey Peak, leaving Laboon with the promise of returning once again. Alabasta Saga, Whiskey Peak Arc. Upon arriving in Whiskey Peak, Luffy and his crew were caught by surprise. Though the two people they took aboard left before they could land, Luffy and his crew were welcomed graciously by the townspeople of Whiskey Peak. There, Luffy and his crew were treated as gods with a grand party. Luffy even ate more than the cooks could put out. Eventually, Luffy passed out from all the excitement of such a celebratory day. However, when he woke later that night, Luffy came to a shocking sight. Scattered everywhere before Luffy were the beaten-up bodies of the townspeople that served him and his crew. Upon learning from one of them that they were defeated by Zoro, Luffy thought that Zoro attacked them as an act of ungratefulness. Confronting Zoro, Luffy and his first crewmate collided into battle that apparently nothing could deter them from. The two were so immersed in their battle against one another that they completely ignored and defeated two other people in the same scene, Mr. Five and Miss Valentine, who were apparently distracting them for some reason. It was only when Nami stepped in and interrupted their fight that the two calmed down to listen to reason. Luffy then learned everything that happened while he was asleep. He also learned that one of the two strangely dressed people that tried to kill Laboon before, Miss Wednesday, was actually Princess Nefertari Vivi of the Kingdom of Alabasta in disguise. From her, Luffy learned that she, her pet dog Karoo, and loyal retainer Igaram had infiltrated a secret criminal organization known as Baroque Works in order to learn the organization's reasons for meddling in their country's affairs. Also from Vivi, Luffy and his crew not only learned of Baroque Works' scheme to take over Alabasta, but also that the criminal organization was led by none other than one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Crocodile. Having gotten involved in all of this, Luffy and his crew decided to help Vivi by taking her and Karoo to Alabasta, while Igaram distracted Baroque Works with a disguise. However, in the midst of this plan, Luffy and the rest witnessed Igaram's ship engulfed in an explosion. Miss All Sunday, Crocodile's partner and vice president of Baroque Works, suddenly announced herself as she sat on the Going Merry's sails. Fortunately, apart from the tense formalities between them and her, Luffy and his crew didn't have to fight her as she let them go for her own reasons. Having survived from the ordeals of Whiskey Peak and gaining a mission to help a princess, Luffy and his crew sailed away from Whiskey Peak to their next destination, Little Garden. Alabasta Saga, Little Garden Arc. Luffy and his crew eventually arrived at Little Garden. The jungle island fascinated Luffy, not only because of the adventure it could provide, but also because it contained all sorts of prehistoric animals, which ranged from saber-toothed tigers to dinosaurs. Luffy decided to venture out of their ship and explore. Vivi and Karoo decided to travel with Luffy to escape her boredom. Luffy learned that the reason the island was like this was due to the Grand Line's unique environmental conditions. The islands within developed much more differently than they normally would, and the very island they were on was still in the dinosaur era. As Luffy ventured the island with Vivi and Karoo, the three soon discovered something much larger than the dinosaurs on the island. In the midst of Luffy messing around with a brontosaurus, the other members of the crew met a giant. Meeting Dory, Luffy and his companions were invited over to the giant's place. There, Luffy was treated to some dinosaur meat and got acquainted with Dory. From the giant, Luffy learned that he was staying on Little Garden in order to settle an argument with another fellow giant, Brogy, in battle. As the matter was being discussed, the island's volcano erupted, signaling the next match between giants. With it, Luffy witnessed a titanic clash between two giant warriors that awed him. Eventually, the match ended in a draw and Luffy continued talking with Dory. Learning further about Little Garden's magnetic field from Dory, Luffy also learned about two of his crew staying with Brogy. Just as things seemed to be going well at the moment, something suddenly shocked Luffy and those with him. A barrel of sake that Dory was drinking exploded. Since the sake was taken from Luffy's ship and given to Dory by Brogy, Luffy and his crew were suspected of sabotaging the barrel. With this, Luffy and Dory got into a fight. Fortunately, Luffy was able to knock Dory down. However, with this sudden turn of events, Luffy started to suspect that his crew were not the only ones on the island, as neither they nor Brogy would do such a thing. Before Luffy and those with him could do anything else, the volcano erupted again and Dory got back up. With the next match being signaled and knowing that the giant's fight was tainted by someone else, Luffy tried to convince Dory not to go. However, Luffy's words didn't reach Dory's ears due to the giant's pride, and Luffy was pinned down by Dory with the giant's home. Unable to get out of his predicament to help Dory, Luffy suddenly encountered Usopp, who had wandered into Dory's home. Reunited with his crewmate, Luffy and Vivi recounted what had just happened and were likewise filled in by Usopp. As Luffy and his companions were figuring out what to do next, they heard the awful scream of Dory being defeated by Brogy due to the tainted fight. Angered even more by this, Luffy was filled with more determination to find out who dishonored the giant's fight. Fortunately, Luffy didn't have to wait long to find out who it was, as two of the perpetrators of the crime, Mr. Five and Miss Valentine, suddenly came before Luffy and his companions, bringing a beaten-up Karoo who had separated from Luffy and Vivi at an earlier time. Because of his current predicament, Luffy was unable to aid his companions and was hit by an explosive kick caused by Mr. Five's Bomu Bomu no Mi powers. Unable to protect Vivi from these Baroque work agents, Luffy and the other two with him were left for dead. As Luffy and the two with him were lying, they decided to get revenge for the atrocity caused by the Baroque Works agents. They eventually got back on their feet and charged immediately to where the Baroque Works agents were holding their friends. Luffy and company arrived and found that their friends were being made into wax statues by Mr. Three's Doru Doru no Mi powers. Luffy engaged in battle with the artist while his comrades battled with the rest of the agents. Despite some complications from Mr. Three and his partner, Miss Golden Week, Luffy was able to free his captured friends with a little help from Usopp. After finishing off Mr. Three, Luffy rejoined the rest of his crew to the marvelous relief. Due to the giant's weapons being worn out from 100 years worth of fighting, Dory was actually okay and had instead passed out from the wound inflicted. With everything done, Luffy and the rest went back to Dory's place to treat his wounds. As Luffy and everyone were resting from the ordeal and wondering how to deal with the island's magnetic field, they were rejoined by Sanji, who brought with him some great news. From Sanji, Luffy and the rest learned that not only did Sanji trick Crocodile into thinking they were all dead by pretending to be Mr. Three via Den Den Mushi Call, but the cook also brought with him the solution to their current problem, an eternal pose to Alabasta. With the eternal pose, Luffy and crew bid their farewells to the giants and set off. As Luffy and crew sailed off from Little Garden, they were provided by the giants with an act of gratitude. With help from the giant's strength, Luffy and crew were able to pass through a giant goldfish and sail on. Alabasta Saga, Drum Island Arc. After Nami suddenly came down with a terrible sickness, the crew decided to alter their course from Alabasta and instead look for a nearby island to have Nami treated by a doctor. The crew was suddenly attacked by Wapol, who demanded their log pose. The crew fought back and Luffy knocked him off their ship so they could continue forward as Wapol's crew cursed them and warned them that they would get their revenge. The crew eventually arrived at a snow-covered land called Drum Island, which was renowned for their advances in medicine. There, the current inhabitants tried to scare away the crew until Vivi lowered her head with Luffy in humility. The leader of the islanders, Dalton, told the villagers to take the crew to the nearest town while Zoro and Karoo stayed behind on the Going Merry. At the village, Dalton told the crew about the witch of the island, Dr. Kureha, who was the only doctor left on the island. To make matters worse, there was no way to contact her as she lived on top of the mountain in the castle previously occupied by King Wapol. Hearing this, Luffy and Sanji decided to carry Nami up the mountain to the castle. On the way up, Sanji, Luffy, and Nami ran into some Lappan, which are man-eating rabbits. Sanji fought off the Lappans as Luffy, while carrying Nami, could not attack or be hit at the risk of Nami being injured as well. Later, the Lappans caused an avalanche, forcing Luffy and Sanji to escape downhill. Fortunately, the group was about to run into a sharp and rocky cliff when Sanji rescued them by kicking them out of the way, but Sanji was knocked unconscious in the process. Luffy, now carrying Nami and Sanji, later saved a buried Lappan. Soon, Wapol caught up to Luffy and attacked him after Luffy showed his back to them. Unable to attack, Luffy tried to flee. However, Chess and Kuromarimo caught up and were about to strike Luffy. At that moment, a large group of Lappans saved him in repayment for Luffy saving one of them earlier. When Luffy climbed the mountain and reached the top, he nearly fell and was rescued by Chopper, who then took the three pirates to Dr. Kureha. Later, Luffy and Sanji awakened and saw Chopper for the first time. They tried to cook and eat Chopper until he turned into a giant form and smashed them down, which greatly impressed Luffy. The Straw Hat captain asked Dr. Kureha to join his crew, but she declined. Finally, Wapol arrived at the castle and began arguing with Dr. Kureha when Luffy suddenly punched him hard. Wapol then retaliated by using his Baku Baku no Mi powers to turn into a house with cannons and fused Chess and Kuromarimo into Chess Marimo. Wapol then shot Dr. Hiruluk's flag, a symbol that Chopper highly values. Wapol fired once again, but Luffy protected the flag. Eventually, the fight began and Chopper started battling Chess Marimo while Luffy fought Wapol. However, Luffy was distracted by Chopper's fight because of Chopper's ability to transform into several different forms thanks to the Rumble Ball, letting Wapol escape into the castle. After Chopper won, Luffy went into the castle and kicked a now thin Wapol who was harassing Nami. Wapol decided to open the weapons room and eat the weapons, but Nami had stolen the key. Wapol then tried to eat Luffy but was stopped, so Wapol turned his tongue into a cannon for one final attack, but Luffy dodged it and sent him flying, causing Wapol to get stuck in the roof. Luffy then, ignoring Wapol's pleas for mercy and empty promises, sent him flying far away. The Straw Hats regrouped at the summit and Dalton thanked Luffy and Chopper. After some persuasion, Chopper decided to go with Luffy and his crew with Dr. Kureha's blessing. As the Straw Hats left, Dr. Kureha initiated Hiruluk's finished research, a powder that makes pink-colored snowfall. The Straw Hats formally welcomed Chopper to the crew and continued on to their planned destination, Alabasta. Alabasta Arc, in Okama, a brother, and a desert crossing. With Chopper on board, Luffy and his crew journeyed onward to Alabasta with Vivi and Karoo. A few days later, while fishing with Usopp and Karoo, Luffy and crew picked up something strange as they passed through a sulfuric steam of an undersea volcano. The thing they accidentally picked up was an Okama known as Mr. 2 Bon Kure. Having passed the steam at the same time Mr. 2's ship was passing through, Luffy and his fishermen accidentally hooked the Baroque Works agent. Not initially knowing who this person was, Luffy and some of his crew immediately became friends with this flamboyant man as he put on a show for them with his Mane Mane no Mi. It was not until Mr. 2's crew came to pick him up that Luffy and his crew realized that he was an enemy. Fortunately, since Mr. 2 didn't likewise know who they were, Luffy and his crew were spared at the time. However, since they were fortunate to meet such an opponent ahead of time, Luffy and his crew decided to take measures to protect themselves from his powers. Taking advice from Zoro, the crew wrapped bandages covering an X on their left wrists. This was so they could tell whether the person before them was the Okama in disguise or not. Upon arriving at the port of Nanohana in Alabasta, Luffy immediately ran off ahead of his crew in search of food. Not caring for the recklessness of his actions, his search for food led him to a restaurant. In his haste to get to the restaurant, Luffy accidentally slammed two men straight through the back of the restaurant and through several houses. To his surprise, one of the men he knocked into was Smoker. Recognizing the Marine, Luffy instantly ran away and was soon being chased by Smoker and his Marines all over town. In the midst of the commotion, Luffy was saved by the other man he knocked over, his brother Ace. Regrouping with his crew back in the Going Merry, Luffy explained things to them about Ace. As Luffy was talking, Ace appeared and momentarily asked Luffy and the other Straw Hats to join the crew he was under, the Whitebeard Pirates. Though Luffy bluntly refused the offer and even stated that he would fight against Ace's captain, Edward Newgate, for the position of Pirate King, the brothers parted ways on friendly terms. Ace also aided Luffy by obliterating some Baroque Works billions and their ships. After sailing across the Sandora River and reaching the other side, Luffy and his crew began their journey to Yuba, where Vivi hoped to persuade the rebel leader, Koza, and his troops there to stop the senseless violence. Upon landing, there was a little incident where Luffy defeated and acquired 100 Kung Fu Dugong apprentices. Though he couldn't bring such a large group along with him, he had formed an everlasting deep bond with the creatures. As Luffy and his crew were further explained by Vivi about the Dugongs, they passed through the once green town of Erumalu and were further enlightened regarding the problems and conspiracies facing Alabasta. After traversing across the huge desert of Alabasta and acquiring a new companion, Matsuge the camel, Luffy and his fellow travelers reached Yuba. There, they discovered that the town was plagued by sandstorms and deserted except for one old man. This old man, Toto, was an old acquaintance of Vivi, and from him, Luffy and the others had learned that the rebels had moved due to the drought and sandstorms in Yuba. Though Toto was initially hostile to Luffy's group, thinking that they were people wanting to join the rebellion, he changed his attitude towards them once he recognized Vivi and offered them shelter for the night. As the rest took up Toto's offer, Luffy decided to help Toto in his desperate search for water to restore the oasis of Yuba. Though slightly incapable of digging and falling asleep midway in digging, Luffy's efforts had helped Toto dig up some water. The next day, as Luffy and the others prepared to travel to the rebels' new base, Luffy was given some of the water he dug up as a present from Toto. With this, Luffy and the others departed Yuba. Just as they were beginning their journey to Katorea, the rebels' new base, Luffy did something that surprised the rest of them. He announced to all of them that he quit. As Luffy's comrades asked him to stop with this seemingly childish act, he told them his reasons. He explained that even if they stopped the rebels, they wouldn't stop Crocodile. To completely solve the matter, Luffy explained that Crocodile himself must be defeated. As Luffy surprised everyone with his insight over the entire situation, Luffy told Vivi that her desire to save everyone was naive as people die. This little statement started an argument between the two of them, which escalated in a small fight. As Vivi explained herself and told Luffy that risking her life to save everyone was the only thing she could do, Luffy asked her why she wouldn't risk the Straw Hats' lives as well since they were her friends. Having stated this, Luffy moved Vivi to tears with his statement of trust and friendship. Seeing her in this state and seeing how she was the one who wanted Crocodile to be defeated, Luffy asked her where they could find him. Alabasta Arc, meeting Crocodile at Rain Base. Having understood each other, Vivi told Luffy and his crew where to find Crocodile. Rain Base. Regardless of the fact that officer agents would be waiting there, Luffy and his group pressed forward to confront the warlord. Upon arriving at Rain Base, Luffy and Usopp were sent by the rest to ask for some much-needed water after much journeying in the desert island. However, upon finding water in a bar, the two accidentally encountered Smoker and Tashigi. Soon enough, another large commotion was caused with Luffy and his crew being chased all around by the Marines. However, Luffy and some of his crew managed to escape from the pursuing Marines and headed into Crocodile's casino, Rain Dinners. Though Luffy and his crewmates with him managed to get into the casino, they entered without Vivi to help them identify what Crocodile really looked like. To make matters worse, Smoker had caught up with them and started chasing them all around the casino. As they were running around, Luffy and those with him were tricked into falling through a trap door by the casino staff. Having fallen for the trick, Luffy and the others, including Smoker, found themselves trapped in a sea stone cage. As they were pondering their current predicament, they were greeted by Crocodile. Having finally met the one who orchestrated the whole mess in Alabasta, Luffy and the others with him were unable to do anything because of the cage they were in. As the situation developed with Vivi being brought before Crocodile by Miss All Sunday and the powers of the devil fruit Crocodile ate, the Suna Suna no Mi, were revealed, Luffy and the rest learned of Crocodile's awful master plan as he mockingly explained it before them. As it went further, Luffy and the others found themselves being placed in a little game the warlord decided to challenge Vivi in. Due to the events being carried out, Luffy and the rest needed to get to Alubarna, the capital of Alabasta, fast in order to stop the upcoming war. However, because of Luffy and those with him being stuck in a cage, Vivi would have to get the key that Crocodile presented and threw into a pit where it was being eaten by Banana Wani. Explaining further that he decided to flood the room they were in, Crocodile presented Vivi the choice between getting to Alubarna in time or saving Luffy and those with him before the room completely floods. As Crocodile was explaining this challenge to Vivi, Luffy overheard Toto being mentioned by the warlord and soon learned that it was Crocodile that was causing the sandstorms that plagued Yuba. Angered by Crocodile's cruelty, Luffy urged Vivi to get the key so that he and the rest can beat Crocodile. Despite Luffy's encouragement, a single Banana Wani proved too much for Vivi. Though all seems lost, Luffy and everyone heard a Denden Mushi ring amidst the ensuing chaos. Recognizing Sanji's voice calling from the Denden Mushi, Luffy and the others realized that there was still hope as Sanji and Chopper weren't captured. As events unfolded with this new development, Luffy and the rest found themselves depending on Vivi finding someone from the outside to get them out. In an attempt to free themselves, Luffy and the others tried to coax one of the Banana Wani into biting open the cage. Though their attempt at breaking the cage through this failed, their hopes were, however, revived as Sanji finally showed up at the scene. With him, the key that Crocodile was found alongside a familiar foe, Mr. 3. Though the Baroque Works agent that came out of the Banana Wani threw the key, Luffy and the others with him were, however, still able to escape the cage via Mr. 3's wax power. As the room flooded and they escaped, Luffy told Zoro to grab Smoker along with them. Having saved the Marine, Luffy and his companions were allowed to go free to get Alubarna. As they were thinking of a way to get to Alubarna fast, they were greeted by Chopper, who brought Hasami, a giant crab friend of Matsuge whom they could ride on. However, just as they were getting aboard, Vivi was literally hooked by Crocodile. Fortunately, Luffy freed her just in time as she was taken away. With Vivi safe, Luffy told his crew to go on as he faced off the warlord himself. As Luffy prepared to face Crocodile, he was told that the warlord would humor him for 3 minutes. After that, Crocodile would leave for Alubarna to complete his scheme. With the time limit in mind, Luffy fought ferociously against his opponent. Though he attacked the best he could, it was however apparent that no matter how much Luffy attacked, he could not damage Crocodile. As they continued to fight one another, Luffy's arms was dehydrated by Crocodile. Using the water given by Toto, however, Luffy was able to restore himself. Remembering the old man, Luffy declares that no matter how much Crocodile attacks Yuba with sandstorms, it will never be destroyed. As Luffy declared this, his 3 minutes were up. As the 3 minutes ended, Luffy witnessed Crocodile decide to do something horrible. Spurred on by Luffy, Crocodile created a massive sandstorm and sent it towards Yuba. Seeing this new development, Luffy desperately tried to stop Crocodile. Unfortunately, in the midst of all this, Luffy was impaled by the warlord and left for dead in the sand. Despite being heavily wounded and buried in the sand, however, Luffy still struggled with the will to fight. As he struggled, in a surprise turn of events, Luffy was suddenly pulled out by Miss All Sunday. Having been pulled out from his sandy grave, Luffy was left in the care of Pell, the hero of Alabasta that the Baroque Works agent defeated a while back. Alabasta Arc, battling Crocodile for the second and third time. With Pell's help, Luffy was able to recover from his wounds and get a ride to Alubarna via Pell's devil fruit, the Tori Tori no Mi, model Falcon. Through various events that happened in the city, by the time the two arrived at Alubarna, a great battle was being waged by the rebels and the royal army in the city square with a sandstorm covering the place. As they arrived, they got just in time to save Vivi, who was dropped by Crocodile from the palace walls. With Vivi safe, Luffy flung himself up the walls to face Crocodile again. During his previous fight, Luffy noticed that water made Crocodile unable to turn into sand as he and the water barrel that Toto gave were pierced by Crocodile's hook. Realizing this, he brought a huge barrel of water to aid him in his rematch against the warlord. As Luffy thus fought Crocodile again, he soon realized that his barrel of water could easily be jeopardized. Figuring this out, Luffy decided to switch tactics by drinking all of his water and storing it within himself, essentially becoming what he dubbed Mizu Luffy, which means Water Luffy. While this new tactic infuriated his opponent, it however proved effective for Luffy. Though Luffy was aided greatly by water this time around, the fight however just made his opponent really mad. Though Luffy was able to evade Crocodile's devastating powers of erosion, he unfortunately got caught by his opponent. As Crocodile's hand held Luffy, he was severely dehydrated and was once again left for dead. Fortunately, however, some water bubbles that Luffy misfired earlier revived him from his near-death state. Rejuvenated once again, Luffy set off in search of his foe. Learning from Tashigi while on his search, Luffy headed to Royal Alabasta Tomb. As he ran, the wound from his chest unfortunately opened, and Luffy, feeling unusually faint, briefly fell unconscious. Recovering himself, Luffy noticed the passageway and ran down into the tomb. Eventually, Luffy caught up with his foe once again in the collapsing ruins. Encountering each other, the two fought each other again. However, having been severely wounded from his previous matches with Crocodile, Luffy used his own bloody body to negate Crocodile's powers this time around. As the battle continued, Luffy kicked Crocodile into the air. Upon doing so, Luffy was blasted with one of Crocodile's powerful techniques. Luffy, however, withstood the attack and prepared to retaliate. Using a series of moves, Luffy propelled himself up to Crocodile to deliver the final blow. As a last resort, Crocodile tried to stop Luffy by turning his hand into blades. This, however, didn't stop Luffy, as he broke through the sand-created weapons with his bare fist and delivered a flurry of punches onto his opponent. Delivering the punches, Luffy attacked Crocodile with such force that it penetrated a layer of pure bedrock and sent Crocodile flying. finally defeating the warlord. Falling back into the ruins, Luffy was thanked by Nefertari Cobra for all he had done. Having used the last of his strength, Luffy was then carried by the king to his crew. Alabasta Arc, Farewell to Alabasta and Vivi. For their valiant heroism in saving Alabasta, Luffy and his crew were treated secretly as VIPs by the royalty for 3 days. Having fully recovered from his wounds from the battle with Crocodile on the 3rd day, Luffy and his crew decided to leave before the awaiting Marines could catch them. Just as they were heading back to the Going Merry, which was secured by Mr. 2 Bon Curé. Before the Marines could find it, Luffy and the others offered Vivi the choice of joining the crew. They gave her until noon the next day. Setting sail with the reformed Bon Curé and his men the next day, Luffy and his crew encountered the blockade the Marines set up to capture them. Through a tearful sacrifice by Mr. 2, Luffy and his crew were able to escape the blockade to go to the rendezvous point to pick up Vivi. Arriving there, they found that Vivi had come as promised. However, to their disappointment, she told them that she still had responsibilities as Alabasta's princess and couldn't come along. Despite this, Vivi asked them that if they ever meet again, would she be accepted to come along again? While Luffy and the others wanted to reply out loud to Vivi that she would still be accepted, they could not out of fear that the nearby Marines would implicate her as a criminal. Instead, however, they quietly showed her the mark that they used to protect themselves if Mr. 2 impersonated one of them, a sign of their friendship. Having delivered their silent response to their friend, Luffy and his crew sail away from Alabasta and onto their next adventure. Though depressed about not having Vivi on the crew, Luffy and the others came across a new development. Nico Robin, aka Miss All Sunday from Baroque Works, had stowed away on the Going Merry and demanded Luffy take responsibility of saving her by letting her join his crew. Without much hesitation, Luffy agreed, much to everyone's surprise.
L is for lovers who love one another. A is for ass, of which I like to eat. U is for you're the only one for me. G is for the only gamer I see. H is for happy, I always feel it. When you put it together, what do you get? Put it together, what do you get? What do you get?